It is football. It is Thursday night. It's the Audible Live. Sigmund Bloom here, captaining this ship with I don't know what the Navy term. You're not a first mate, Matt, but you always are beside me in the co-pilot seat. And we have football. We have football to talk about. We have a lot of things to talk about. As on the great reveal, the big reveal of Week 1, there are always some unexpected things. We're gonna have a lot of great times with Footballguys, hosts of some other shows. We're gonna get to that with Chad Parsons here tonight. But Mr. Matt Waldman, give us a first half game update.
Well, we have a 10-10 tie, and it's been an interesting game from the standpoint that multiple interceptions thrown, one from Stafford, and then 2 from Allen, but one was ripped out basically on a throw where he's been making a lot of zone throws inside, just trying to get past the linebackers, basically to access those slot receivers. And one bounced off the mitts of Isaiah McKenzie, and then another one, he was late on a throw over the middle to Crowder, I believe, and that was picked off by Troy Hill. But that said, you know, if you were looking for James Cook, he had his welcome to the NFL moment as rookie, first carry, fumbled the ball, hasn't been in the game since. Zach Moss has been used more as a runner and a receiver out of the backfield. Singletary's getting his usual touches. And then you see Gabriel Davis wins on a matchup route where not a matchup route, but a schemed route where he looks like the receiver to basically seal the edge on basically an I formation run play action look. And then he's wide open in the flat for a touchdown, and he's getting open on basically zone plays. And then when it's time to actually win against Jalen Ramsey one-on-one in a we need it moment, Stephon Diggs, the receptions leader in this game, or target leader in this game, wins against Jalen Ramsey on a back shoulder. Matt Stafford finding Cooper Kupp in the back corner of the red zone on a smash concept, which is basically you got a corner route over a flat route, and the defensive back really has a kind of the safety has a bind on what to do there and doesn't know how to. You've got to read that pretty quickly, and so Kupp's getting some of his in those options. Allen Robinson dropped the ball earlier. No, he didn't. He had a couple of nice plays on drives. Tutu Atwell dropped the ball. Fortunately, he didn't blow away with that stiff breeze. But the run game, Cam Akers, one play, basically got stuffed in the backfield. Darrell Henderson's getting most of the touches there. And, you know, the Bills just seem to be taking advantage of the zone looks a lot by spreading the field out. And, you know, but they are, you know, he got a sack. Aaron Donald got a sack. Von Miller got a sack on a bull rush. And the Rams line does not look good. That interior line. And then plus the fact that they've lost Whitworth is as our buddy Eric Stone said, yeah, that's huge. So, you know, hopefully Stafford can make it through the season.
Right. There's a lot to go through here. I'm going to add my take, and then Chad, I'm going to tee this up for you to give us anything that, even if the to-do list is to decide whether something ends up on the dynasty to-do list, because I think what this game already signifies is whatever all of our preconceived notions or whatever our takes were, whatever we expected, we're going to have to go back to the drawing board. And some of this stuff is going to be fugazi. Some of this stuff is going to be what was just week 1. We'll look back and say that was actually a false negative or a false positive, but there's lots of action items here. Again, going through this stuff, Josh Allen looks great. I mean, Josh Allen's going to be one of the best quarterbacks of this era. And he's functioning well. No Brian Dable. Like Matt said, the play call on the Gabriel Davis touchdown was excellent, and the execution was excellent. And this offense looks like it's going to be a little more narrow of a pass tree. It looks like it is going to be a Diggs with no problem. Jalen Ramsey coming back off his shoulder surgery, but Diggs having no problem gobbling up catches, getting open, making those catches in tight spaces. Josh Allen trusting him. Diggs looks great. Davis looks great. Isaiah McKenzie, not so much. He did have that big game last year. Dawson Knox just not as involved. The backfield is a split, but James Cook with that fumble, and hey, sometimes you can be superstitious, but the fumble on the first NFL carry, it's going to be slow going for James Cook. Probably we'll see Zach Moss on some waiver wires in deeper leagues as a pickup. Even though Zach Moss doesn't look great, Zach Moss is still going to get touches in a high-powered offense. I think Matt brought up a very important point about the Rams and the offensive line. And I can't tell, Matt, I'm going to throw it back to you just for a second, because, and this is one of those, Matthew Stafford in the elbow. On one hand, I haven't seen him really look to test the defense downfield, but on the other hand, it doesn't look like he has time to do it. Do you think that's accurate, where we can't necessarily attribute this completely to one or the other?
I think that's totally accurate right now, especially if there's one thing that beat writers are going to be able to report with, unerring accuracy at anybody just observing a training camp, is whether the guy has zip on his arm and is able to throw the ball repeatedly downfield. So I think all that's fine. I just think the issue is that there's just, the Bills have two big dudes up front in Oliver and Phillips who can push the pocket. And then you got Miller in his own right, who's still a great veteran, and it's just given that Rams front a lot of trouble.
Yeah, and you saw Joseph Noteboom, left tackle, have his moments against Von Miller, but I think this just the Bills' defense. You have to take your hat off to them, even without Tre'Davious White. That great safety combo, and really the defense has done a good job limiting the damage from turnovers and things like that. So with the Rams for fantasy, Cooper Kupp is still Cooper Kupp. If you took him number 1 overall, he's going to be the same as last year. In fact, if anything, if they have more trouble making time for downfield throws, and I'm not ready to write off Allen Robinson, but for Allen Robinson to really pop in this offense, they are going to need to have time to throw downfield. Darrell Henderson looks good as far as his burst. I don't know how long he's going to hold up if he's really the lead back. But I think the main story here, Chad, and this is how I'll hand it over to you, is that Cam Akers, and Matt has been bringing up all summer, hey, let's have skepticism about these Achilles running backs. Now, John Shipley, who does an excellent job covering the Jags, said, well, if we're looking at James Robinson and Cam Akers, they're different backs, different styles, maybe different amounts that they rely on their athleticism. But do you think the Rams are telling us that Cam Akers isn't really going to be the answer and we should act accordingly in dynasty leagues? Or maybe is this a moment to say, hey, he was hurt during training camp. There's still a lot of things with his pedigree, with how they wanted to use him in the past, that maybe this is actually a moment to swoop in and get him at a deep discount.
Well, hopefully you get a deep discount, because, I mean, you talk about everyone was positive that he played last year. Check the box. He found the field. What a story. But it was still way too soon. And even now, you look at the calendar of typical Achilles, it's still way too soon. A lot of times you have to have almost a redshirt year and then 2023 arrival date. I mean, that's something I've been saying with Cam Akers all off season, that a lot of people pushing him back up and getting that hype and that, those assumptions and predictions going for this year. They said unequivocally, we feel like we have 2 starters. Well, one starter's not playing. One starter's playing a whole lot in the first half of the first game. And with Akers, you have to see it. Get all the way back to seeing what he looked like multiple years ago as a prospect, that first year when he was peaking, and we saw what he could do in this offense and what he was building upon. It kind of reminded me of Deonta Foreman, who at the end of his rookie year was peaking against Lamar Miller in Houston, and then the Achilles happens and it just derails everything. And so Cam Akers, I feel like the reaction is probably not going to be strong enough post this game. But if you were skeptical before, and maybe you exited, some of your shares, and it was really a big redraft point. Redraft, you might actually move on and think he's an injury away option. He's a backup at this point in time. And even if Henderson breaks down, you still have the complication of, is Cam Akers good? Is his percentage point towards 100% high enough? If he's at 72%, you don't have like Adrian Peterson, Saquon Barkley, some of the biggest at the position, physical attribute guys over the years. 72% may not be enough for them to actually post good numbers. So especially for Cam Akers, and the thing I go back to is this still was not a high leverage opportunity offense. They didn't throw to running backs a lot. So Akers was going to be a guy that needs 12 touchdowns, 15 touchdowns, a touchdown per game to really hit those expectations and projections of top 12, top 15, something like that. He just was not going to get it in a high volume receiving way. So if you were skeptical before, you were probably out at the prices redraft or dynasty this offseason, and week 1 is just going to fade you further. I would say in dynasty more so than redraft, if you take a spot, if you trade a future second for him, let's be fair. That is maybe a late day 2 running back if you're lucky, and someone that may not be viewed as a starter right away at all. So, and really 2023 is going to be that arrival date. But I will pose one question. That won't the price fall farther? Won't it fall in future weeks outside of Henderson being hurt and Akers being the presumed projected starter for a coming week, that's the only way he's going to resurface and kind of gain back maybe 50% of what he's lost right now, because it's such a graphic change and fall from people's expectations.
Yeah, I think you're right that what would cause it to change, what would make the window small, is if we get something on the record from the team saying, well, he actually was dealing with something. And we're seeing a lot of this week, by the way. Here's one of the stories of this week. Learning about injury. Oh, George Kittle's hurt. Oh, Deontay Johnson is actually in danger of missing. There's a lot of stuff we're learning. Wait, huh? Because the teams downplay everything
until now when they can't, and we're finally into the practice report and participation mode of these 3 key days. Yeah.
And then they invent injuries of guys that we were worried about just because they want them to rest before the season begins.
Zach Wilson inventing injuries anymore,
or maybe Michael Thomas, or maybe Kadarius Toney. Maybe they've seen enough of both of those guys and said, we need them for the season. Let's rest them up.
Remember when Randy Moss didn't do anything in training camp at all the year that he joined the Patriots, and he kind of just smiled?
Well, J.K. Dobbins is another one that it just seems like this whole woulda, shoulda, coulda kind of sort of iffy. Like, we keep getting that language of not positive stuff. I wouldn't be surprised if we see him miss multiple games. I mean, maybe even we don't see him till October. All these things are in play. Oh, Mike Davis, let's not react to that. That's a significant signing. They doubled down with Kenyon Drake. They're telling us everything of, we don't expect to have this guy, let alone Gus Edwards, to start the season. And I think a lot of people are still sitting there with Dobbins checkmarked for this week. And it's like they might pull him out this weekend. You almost have to have the opposite. Assume he's out. And then maybe put him back. And then I still, lesser so than Akers, I was a little less concerned about Dobbins. But both I thought were wildly overrated in terms of what you're physically expecting from them, especially in the first month or two this season.
Yeah, and I think, Chad, you're making some great points here that, and we're going to lose all this, right? The washing machine of the season is going to go, but let's take this moment out and put it on our to-do list for next year, that when players are coming back from these injuries, expect teams to ease them in. And what that creates for redraft is not only uncertainty of when they're going to be on the field, but then uncertainty of when you can trust them in your lineup once they're on the field, because it isn't always the first week back or second week back that they get the full workload or they regain their form. So healthy skepticism for these players who aren't healthy going into training camp. And with Cam Akers, you brought up the redraft angle, Chad. And I think with Cam Akers, the reason why he's the headline is because it's recently, as a month or two ago, people were spending 4th round picks on him. And there was this assumption that, well, they wanted him to be the lead back going into last year. He's obviously healthy enough to be the lead back now if he was on the field at the end of the year. They fed him like a lead back when he came back, even though he didn't look like he was fully healthy. Of course, he's going to be the lead back now. Darrell Henderson has proven he can't hold up for a long time as a lead back. People bring up Kyron Williams in the chat room. That's something where you wonder, when he figure in. I still think there may be a name that isn't even on the roster that figures into this backfield by the end of the year. Go ahead, Chad.
The problem I have is that with some of these backfields, and the Bills are another one. I mean, Bills had 3 day 2 picks on rookie contracts on the same depth chart, which is A, hard to do. B, I think it says something about everybody involved. Maybe not the last guy drafted, but certainly the first 2. But you look at Akers and Henderson. Henderson was a day 2 pick. So to say you just throw him out with the bathwater, guy can't play, guy can't be an NFL starter, and we may have some concerns about workload, and is he going to last 2 months? Is he truly going to be a top 12, top 15 guy, and that workload over a season? You can have all those questions. That's great. But still, from a pedigree perspective and the expectations, day 2 backs generally, unless they're 190 pounds, are expected at some point to be an NFL starter. That's the expectation. That's why they're drafted that way. And so to assume that it can't be Henderson, and they come out and say, we have 2 starters. That's kind of what they should be saying with that pedigree. And the Bills are interesting in the same way. I mean, James Cook, too many people draft these rookies with the expectation that week 1, September, a lot of times, and Nick Chubb is a great example, mid-season, 3rd month of the year, second half, playoff run for your fantasy teams, that's kind of when you're expecting them to blossom and peak. And maybe there's an injury that accelerates that timetable. But James Cook with 2 other day 2 picks that are seasoned in the NFL and pros, you can say Zach Moss, oh, complete bust. Oh, Devin Singletary, not good in the passing game. These things can be true, and it still may be a tough nut to crack for James Cook to just come in. And I think a lot of people had expectations. James Cook, big name, comes in with more pedigree than those two guys. And he's just going to take the lead role. It's just, that's the part and wild expectations there of it's got to be more of a patient play. And we're seeing that. And obviously an early fumble might set him back even from whatever stunted timetable he was.
And one of the important things to remember, and we need to think about this when we start looking at future training camps, and this is talked about a lot, is that coaches really don't know what they have in a running back during training camp. They just don't, because there's no contact. There's very little changes in terms of scheme or looks. So all the varieties of things that they have to process at a high level at the position aren't in play. So Kyle Shanahan
it's like the Senior Bowl,
last year.
Matt, it's like the Senior Bowl, right? We go to the Senior Bowl and running back's the position not to watch because there's nothing going on. It's a bunch of scrums and they let them go. And it's like, 80-yard touchdown again.
That's right. And Kyle Shanahan said it last year. He said, we don't really know what he said it 2 years ago with Michael Hasty. We really didn't know what he had in him because, again, when they look good in that environment, it's not an accurate environment. So oftentimes players get a chance to build their way into a role. Because remember, Clyde Edwards-Helaire, everyone went nuts over him a few years ago. And then also you brought up Nick Chubb. He was playing on special teams and he had a screw up on special teams against the Steelers. And he looked all right against the Giants if you knew what you're looking for. But if you didn't, everyone was panning him, including some former NFL defensive backs who were out there panning him. And we saw what was there after a while, when he got that opportunity. So with running backs, you kind of have to be patient. The good thing is you only really need one to be a high-scoring fantasy team if you drafted well. So as long as you didn't build your roster heavily on running backs early and front-loaded it, especially with the risky ones that you just brought up, Chad, then you should be okay.
Well, we also know that we've seen this before with preseason, and then when the game speeds up, regular season action, all of a sudden the running backs look a little slower. They're not quite as decisive. They don't know what they're seeing. And so you might have an explosive player not playing explosively and instinctively, and just, what playground rules, right? I'm going to dodge you. I'm faster than you. I'm more explosive than you. I'm more powerful, whatever it is, but it just moves too fast. So all those things add on, the game is now faster than high school, than college, than preseason, than reps in training camp and off-season programs and all this. So you add all that together, and that's why I think really with rookies, and especially now, you got to give them a little pass and latitude, because it's a huge high bar to hurdle to be an early impact guy, and you just don't see it very often.
And here's another thing that I had on with Russ Landy this week that he brought up that I thought was fascinating, because last year this time, at about exactly this time, Tyson Williams had an awesome half after being a UDFA who was impressive for basically 2 off seasons, and ran his way up to the point where John Harbaugh at the end of the preseason was like, I love how you run, as he trotted off the field scoring a touchdown. Had a big run against the Raiders in the first half, and then looked like he was scared to death of fumbling the ball in the second, and his entire game slowed down. And Russ brought this up. He goes, we like to pound the narrative about players helping one another, the old vet helping the young guy. He said, but what we don't talk about is these old vets who used to be starters who now are getting the veteran minimum and want to keep that veteran minimum, getting into their teammates' head to be able to cop their spot and going, hey, Rook, you better hold on to that ball, because if you don't, you might not play the rest of this half. Now, I don't know about you, but Zach Moss and Devin Singletary might be looking at this and going, one of us is going to be going by the wayside. And it's interesting that Zach Moss had the preseason of his life compared to other preseasons that he's had.
Well, kind of like Ronald Jones, right? Ronald Jones get to the brink of maybe not making the 53, and all of a sudden he gets out there last game, and all the talk is, he earned his spot, looked great, and now, we have to keep him.
Don't drop that ball, rookie.
Tyson Williams, the one thing I remember about Tyson Williams, the analogy, I think, is being one of those starters, like they run with the pack, and they set the pace for some of these 1,500 or 3,000 meter runs for the Olympics. They set the pace, and then they just exit off to the side. It's like off the highway, and they're not even going to finish the race. Tyson Williams basically started the race, made sure everything was on track for, I think it was Latavius Murray, right?
And Devontae Freeman.
Yeah.
backs.
And so all these veterans ended up taking over, getting their
Yep.
sea legs under them, after they
Yeah.
were late additions to the team.
Don't drop the ball in the second half, rookie. I'm
Yeah.
pretty sure, I think Russ is onto something with that. So,
Well,
you know,
there's things where there's friendly competitions that maybe aren't so friendly. And I think that there's a really good takeaway from all this, which is that rookie impatience. First of all, it leads to rookies being overdrafted and redraft,
Yep.
which maybe you swoop in when they get dropped and you look for that second half push. And in Dynasty, you may have that emotional letdown of expecting so much from the rookie out of the gate, and maybe you get a discount also. But I think we can say, because it used to be that we were all stampeding each other to get that rookie running back, and every year there would be a rookie running back that would hit and win your league or make your roster. And the last few years, it's been almost universal disappointment with rookie running backs in a redraft. And because of that, there's probably been some good buy low windows for Dynasty. Okay, Chad, I want to tee up another question for you. Go ahead.
Can I say one thing about
Yeah.
that? That redraft, you don't have time. A lot of these that are 15, 16 rosters. So James Cook, you drafted him. You pretty much need primary backups, and only the best ones can be on your bench.
Right.
That is it. James Cook does not qualify. We don't know about the upside of the Bills in general, any of these guys, even the quote unquote starter. And then the other part is he's not even declared as the number 2 back. So he doesn't fit the criteria. I think in redraft, it makes sense to drop him. Yeah. He's an albatross for that roster spot from what we've seen so far. And then the other point would be in Dynasty, you have more latitude, but depending on the depth, you need to be patient, yes. And like you said, almost be a vulture out there looking for the discount. But a lot of times people get so sticky with the price they paid a few months back. You're not, if someone paid 112, 202, something like that, throwing out a second next year isn't going to get it done. But if it happens for a month, then they're going to be looking for exits. They're going to be looking over their shoulder saying, I got to get out of here because it's only going to get worse. When frankly, actually, it's not, because it's dropped to a point where maybe you throw out exactly. It can only get better because that pedigree is going to be sticky.
Yeah, it's difficult, and I think there's a mirror to this in investment in general, that the good buy low time is when you yourself might be doubting it, because it's that universally understood that this player's bottomed out, and the time to sell high is when you might have hesitation because it feels like such a cinch that this player is going to stay at this level for the plateau, like all the way to the horizon. And that's the psychology of buy low, sell high. I think this is great stuff. We're thinking about how we navigate these seas. Now, Chad, I want to ask you from a Dynasty perspective. And by the way, folks, if you haven't tuned in, 9:30 Eastern, Tuesday night, Dynasty show with Chad and Jordan McNamara, two of my favorite people. Been working with them for a long time. Happy that we're all part of Footballguys family. We're going to be doing something fun this year again, bringing in the hosts of some of our other shows, talking on Thursday nights, talking football, talking about the games that are going on. And I want to just ask you this, Chad, from a Dynasty perspective, when we're looking ahead to this weekend's games, are there any players that stand out that you feel like, hey, this is maybe a make or break moment, that the players, let's say, whose Dynasty value could change the most as we watch the games on Sunday?
Well, the name I was swirling around before the question even started was, I was going to ask you about Dameon Pierce. I think he's a very interesting player on 2 or 3 different prongs. The first one is day 3 running back. Generally, that's not going to have a lot of allegiance. So I know that the depth chart is ripe, but he's a player that really didn't stay healthy and really didn't garner a huge workload in college. Not once. I mean, obviously he looks good compared to someone like Antonio Gibson, who almost didn't play the position. But I think with Dameon Pierce, the situation looks so great. I mean, we saw him go later second, even 3rd round sometimes back in May. You advance to the last few weeks, and he was going 102 to 106 in some of the drafts I saw. So that's a lot of pressure, and there's almost no upside there. If he hits, I mean, is he going to go for more than a future first? Probably not. And so Dameon Pierce is that guy that I have a few questions. The first is, carrying the workload in general. The second one is, if the team's not very good, I don't think he saw any pure passing snaps in the preseason. Rex Burkhead, Dare Ogunbowale, they kept both of those guys. That's what they do. Burkhead is just a pro that's been around a decade. I think that he's going to be another one that does everything right. You may have more talent than him, but he is going to be tough to beat him out in terms of reducing errors. And Dare Ogunbowale has had more jobs than I think a lot of us think he's deserves to have. Not a big time talent, but he can do the pass part well.
Right.
And so I think those two players are interesting holds, and they didn't hold Marlon Mack. He comes back on the practice squad. But I think Dameon Pierce, if game script is wrong, if he doesn't get, and I wonder if he's going to have, I call them empty calorie box scores. If he has 18 carries for 86 yards, but 1 catch or 0 catches. And if he doesn't score a touchdown, you can say, good player. I like what I saw, but people that box score scout and go, well, you still didn't score. You scored 8.2 points or whatever it is. So I just wonder if the team's going to be good enough to sustain what he probably needs, because he's not going to be a 50 catch guy. He might not even be a 35 catch guy. So it could be touchdown or bust, or 3 or 4 chunk plays or bust to have a good running back 2 type game. And so I think Burkhead, if there's hurry up mode for days in some of these games, and I think it might be matchup centric, Dameon Pierce is that name that I think there's a lot of pressure, because if he puts up an empty calorie box score week 1, that could be a sign of things to come. And again, I think it was appropriate to have him drafted as a situationally valued guy in round 2 somewhere. You start pushing him to round 1, expectations go through the roof.
Yeah, I remember when Philip Lindsay broke out, I traded him for a future first during that season. And I wonder if maybe right before the season, like you said, Chad, maybe Dameon Pierce, that window to trade him for a future first is just the next few days, or, he could bust off that 60-yard touchdown run, or the Texans could be improved. Because I think you're right. And this is something we always have to remember, that a big part of our outlook for Dameon Pierce is our outlook for the Texans. And we'll see what they do against DeForest Buckner and company against the Colts. We have a redemption storyline. Isaiah McKenzie getting the touchdown after the interception that he gave up. So he atones for that. Devin Singletary looking good on this drive. And of course, and by the way, it was a minor draft weekend trade whenever the Rams got Troy Hill back, I think from Cleveland, and for a 5th round pick. And he's back to being the great player he was for this Rams defense. And the main thing here I continue to say is, hey, Josh Allen, he is very good. Matt Waldman, is there anybody looking ahead to this weekend that you're going to be sitting straight up in your seat when they get on the field, when they get the ball, because it's going to help you form further your strategy of their outlook, their profile, how you're going to advise people for that player this year?
Yeah, I mean, and I'll add with Dameon Pierce, I agree with Chad completely about that for this particular year. And he's also a player as a runner that I think is more of a looking over your shoulder type of talent, meaning that he can be a contributor, but do you see him being a high-end starter? To me, the only way that happens is if he's involved in the receiving game down the line. And when you study his tape, he has great hand-eye coordination, and he's a promising route runner on the level of what you can build upon once you learn coverages. But obviously, they don't feel comfortable with that yet with him as both either a pass protector or a route runner at this stage. Now, that could change within the span of the season, and if it does, he may be a buy low, for your dynasty league at this point. But it was a guy that I want to keep an eye on is David Njoku, because there's a lot of metrics that are really positive about David Njoku. But I also, when I watch David Njoku on tape, what I see is a player who gets a lot of scheme plays or open plays in zone, where he's not that matchup guy who's going to win a lot one-on-one, even though he has that one-on-one athletic ability. And if he doesn't work out, waiting in the wings is an interesting player in Harrison Bryant, who's savvy. And on top of that, David Bell, who may not be a tight end, but he will get the targets that a lot of tight ends get in the middle of the field. And all he does is catch the football and get open in zones. And Cleveland's going to need players to supplement what happens with Amari Cooper. So David Bell could give you that possible Jarvis Landry, Miami type of season as a low end, running a wide receiver 3 if Njoku doesn't work out. Another one I want to see is how often the Raiders are going to use 2 tight end sets, because they want to run the ball in that they want to run the ball in that offense. And Darren Waller isn't going to be mistaken for a blocker, even when he tries. So to me, one of the best all-around tight ends in the league who isn't playing every down is Foster Moreau. And if they decide, and Mac Hollins, they talk up Mac Hollins, the 3rd receiver, all the time. That's great. Mac Hollins, great special teams player, big dude. He can catch somewhat. he's not going to be mistaken for a fantasy option other than a bye week play on a regular basis. But if they go a lot of 12 personnel, and even if it's disguised as 11 or shifted to 11 with Darren Waller as one of those outsider slot detached receivers, guess who's getting those looks up the seam? It's going to be Foster Moreau. And this is enough of an offense, especially with their defense and the game scripts they're going to have. I think Foster Moreau is one of those guys that you just take a shot on in redrafts, and you were holding on in Dynasty and thinking that this could be awesome value for you as a low-end tight end one, maybe in 12, even in maybe 12-team leagues, if it works out where they go this Martellus Bennett, Gronkowski, Hernandez, Gronkowski look.
Exactly. The island of Foster Moreau. I know that you and I are on that island, Matt, as
future starter.
Future starter. I mean,
he just has the look of second contract starter going somewhere else, like Martellus Bennett, as an example from Dallas. Hey, Sid, can I ask you one question?
Please.
Because I know, your Steelers following. I got to ask, because I'm perplexed by this. Everyone is elevating George Pickens to a very high level.
Mm-hmm.
Chase Claypool still has a lot of appeal. And then you have Deontay Johnson, target hog. And it doesn't seem like it's an offense that's going to support more than one wide receiver. And so it feels like, and something I've been saying is Chase Claypool, if he's in the wide receiver 35 to 45 zone for Dynasty, he has the potential to fall through the floor within the next few months where he's left out. If George Pickens is the goods, and a good season for him might be wide receiver 50 or 60 based on this offense, where does Claypool go? I mean, he's out in Siberia with Freiermuth and Najee Harris. I mean, they have a lot of weapons that probably a quarterback doesn't support. What's your kind of read on, is there value here beyond Harris and Deontay Johnson? Like, can they sustain enough, show enough pop plays to keep us all kind of in the game and say big time talent, future rewards in some form or fashion?
Right. Not while Mitchell Trubisky is the quarterback. And I think it's because of the offensive line. And I also don't have faith in Matt Canada to set up a rational game plan. I think that from a dynasty perspective, what you want to do is hope that Trubisky makes it look like you said, this is not going to be a pass offense that even in a given week supports more than one fantasy option. And it may change week to week depending on matchups or just who's hot. And then you do start to see, I think Pickens has that allure of the unknown. And let's be clear, the first chapter of Pickens' story is similar to the first chapter of players like Odell Beckham or other players that just, as soon as they get on the field, people say, wow, okay, it doesn't matter. This guy's going to transcend his situation. So I don't think Pickens' value is going to come down at all. But I think you're right about Claypool. The interesting thing is they're actually putting him in as a big slot, which is where I thought, even before the Steelers drafted him, I thought that made a lot more sense to me watching his game at Notre Dame, where he fit on the field. And like you mentioned, Deontay Johnson, don't forget he has a 2-year extension now. That was not really.
That's huge. I mean, for people thinking he might be halfway at the door, they just keep churning through to cheap wide receivers that can play. He's not going anywhere.
No, he's not.
Do you hold out hope for Pickett? Do you hold out hope for Pickett?
Well, that's the thing. So when Kenny Pickett comes in
later in the season, that he could
when Kenny Pickett comes in, Kenny Pickett has more of the skill set that can mitigate the offensive line issues. Kenny Pickett. Now, what I'm afraid of is that it looks like Kenny Pickett, at least based on what we saw in the preseason, he has that composure in a no huddle situation, which actually can help paper over some of the offensive line issues to distribute the ball, make valid decisions, and not really look like a rookie out there. But I don't think the Steelers have it in them. It's the Steelers way, right? I mean, I can't remember who made this comment on Twitter. I saw that there are franchises that are so stuck in their glory years that they can't move ahead and come up with another template or another blueprint for how you win games, and particularly how you win games offensively. So I think the best glass half full take I can give for the Steelers is the offense. It's that the offensive line woes are overstated, and actually Ben Roethlisberger was holding back this offense in the last few years. They weren't able to run plays true to the concepts, true to how play design, play calling creates advantages for the offense. It was all just Ben Roethlisberger, basically his quarterback / offensive coordinator. And now you'll see, because they have such tremendous skill talent, the ability to leverage some of that into results. I still think offensive line, you don't get out of the driveway. until your offensive line is doing their job.
And when you take a look at Claypool, and he definitely was not a good outside receiver.
No.
He benefited from teams really just rolling over to everybody else and underestimating certain areas of his skill sets that are decent. So if he does not follow through as a slot receiver who's productive, I would keep an eye on Calvin Austin, because if you ask me, Calvin Austin, when you look at the two receivers who were that size profile, high speed, very short, the better player, in my opinion, was Calvin Austin, not Wan'Dale Robinson. And Wan'Dale's a good player, and I think he'll be a nice player, but he's a little more gadgety. I think Calvin Austin has a better route profile in terms of what he can do. He understands how to position himself at the catch point, and he's as good, if not better, of a runner in the open field. And when he heals from that foot injury, I would not be shocked at all if Claypool isn't playing well or producing well. We might see Calvin Austin as one of those shocker players that you might want to preemptively pick up if you have the luxury to add somebody just to see.
And not insignificant pedigree, right? I mean, they took him early in day 3, and that probably means a day 2 grade, on a lot of
Thank
boards.
you for saying that. Yes.
So let's not discount him, because if you have a fading Chase Claypool in terms of they've seen enough, they just drafted 2 wide receivers in the first 4 rounds, plus re-signed Deontay Johnson. That is, the one guy left out is Chase Claypool, and that's probably not the best taste in our mouths of what do they think of him. I did want to add the other 2 situations that I think have huge fantasy week 1 overreaction, or maybe appropriate reaction for what we see: the Green Bay and Kansas City offenses, the passing games and the wide receivers. And now with the Allen Lazard factor, if he may not play, we might get another. I think someone had a stat of how good Sammy Watkins has been in week 1s. He's probably going to see a ton of snaps, health pending. And then for the Chiefs, I keep going back to this. The thing I've been swirling around for a month, the only guy they've paid to any requisite amount is Marquez Valdes-Scantling. And they paid Juju Smith-Schuster like $150. So either he wanted to play there no matter what, and the Chiefs knew that, or his market is almost nothing. Like, that's the one thing. I want to be all in on Juju Smith-Schuster, looking at career arcs and all this stuff. Look how great he was 3 years ago. I mean, but it almost doesn't make sense that they got a full-fledged, high-volume number 1 wide receiver for $3 million? That makes no sense. Either the entire NFL let them off the hook, or it's going to be truly a spread around thing. It feels like Juju has a lot to lose. So does Sky Moore if he's the wide receiver 4 or 5 to start the season. Marcus Valdes-Scantling, if he puts up half the big plays that we've seen over the years from Tyreek Hill in a given year, he might be the play. Yeah. And he got the most money, 3 for 30. So those 2 passing games, I think people are going to draw definitive thoughts from week 1. Whoever gets the most targets, whoever puts up 10, 15, 20 PPR points, there's going to be a lot of ramifications. And we know both of those quarterbacks can absolutely deal and supply that to, now I'm not going to say almost anybody, but all they need is a baseline requisite amount of do your job, and they can make an okay and good option a great fantasy option.
Yeah, absolutely. And what's great about that, Chad, and we're going to wind up here and get back to watching this game, get back to hanging out on a Thursday night, but I think that's a great note to end on. The matchup, I'd say bet the over, because the matchups are tremendous. Green Bay is facing Minnesota. That game was a 34-31 shootout last year in Minnesota. Minnesota's without Mike Zimmer. They're going to improve on offense. Not sure about on defense. Kansas City might be the highest scoring team of week 1. They're facing Arizona. Some of the best players for Arizona, Marcus Golden, a weight got dropped on his toe. One of their starting corners, which they were already very low on their depth chart, hurt himself in a cooking accident. JJ Watt isn't healthy. What does this defense really have to counteract what Patrick Mahomes can do? And I think you're right to bring up Valdes-Scantling, especially in this game where Mahomes is going to have time to eat a sandwich, make a sandwich, and eat a sandwich back there. That's Marquez Valdes-Scantling's music. With Juju, the interesting thing is, I was talking about this with Heath Cummings on the couch this week. His contract was structured so that it really is it's a very unique contract, because it really is like a 1 year, $8 or $9 million deal, as long as he hits very attainable incentives, like 55 catches, 65 catches, stuff like that. But take a step back, and what does that mean? What does that mean? Because usually teams are paying for the production they expect up front, right? Like Hunter Renfrow didn't have something in his contract that said you get $16 million only if you catch 80 balls. They just paid him the $16 million up front. So that tells me there is something to the issue that the knee is holding teams back from investing in him. The knee is making teams think we don't necessarily trust that you can hold up for an entire season and contribute to the offense. So I think there's only one way to read that contract. It's skepticism from Kansas City saying, hey, if you just produce the way that we hope you do, we will pay you that fair market $8-9 million. But we want to build in protection for us that if you can't, if you're physically unable to, then we don't have to pay you for that production up front.
Well, and go back to these running backs we started the show with, right? I mean, if they are a percentage of their 100% self,
right,
they may not have that much to lose. They may look like just a guy. If Juju was an average NFL athlete for the wide receiver position and he loses 10%, what does that look like?
Yeah, exactly.
And I wondered that about Michael Thomas too. Same
Yeah.
sort of thing. Like if he loses 10-15% and he was a contested catch and inside of 15 yards guy already, does that make him unplayable? Does that make it so that he's borderline irrelevant NFL and fantasy terms? Like those types of things, like do they have that much to lose?
Yeah, well, and I think that in general, having an open mind as we have week one wash over us and not arguing with what we see, but allowing us to revise. And I keep coming back to this metaphor about the offensive lineman who gives up the sack that causes the fumble, often recovers the fumble. And when we have these strongly held convictions, and we're going to notice, and emotionally it's going to register when we're getting information that tells you were wrong, or maybe you were wrong, or maybe something's happening that you didn't even account for. But that means we might be the first ones because you're so wrong to know what's happening and act accordingly. We always got to be flexible. We always got to be malleable. Thankfully, we've got people like Matt Waldman, Chad Parsons. Tuesday night here on the YouTube channel. Subscribe and you'll get notifications. Tuesday night, Chad and Jordan, the Dynasty Show, 9:30 p.m. Eastern. We're going to have a lot of fun here on Thursday nights with y'all. We appreciate getting to take this ride with you. It's a privilege. It's a pleasure. Footballguys community is the best. You're the best people to serve. I hope we continue to make it worth your while because you're so very